Okay, welcome. We're on deck. We're in exam 78. We're going to take a look at questions 1 through 5. The purpose of this is to demonstrate how to brief on the test. So, let's take a look at section 1. In the logical reasoning, question number 1 is which one of the following principles is valid justifies Hidalgo's stance. Stop. Principle is a broad statement. That's in the answer choice. What you're going to read is an example or an illustration, and specifically we care about what Hidalgo says. So, we have, Garcia. The survey we are conducting needs to track employment status by age. So, respondents should be asked to indicate their age. So the conclusion is respondents should be asked to indicate their age, and the reasoning is that we have a survey conducting that needs to track employment status. Okay. Hidalgo responds to that. We don't need results that provide employment status figures for every single age. All right, so we don't need to know that Peter is 63. So, as a result of that, we should instead ask respondents merely to identify the age range they fall into. So, for me, Hidalgo was saying maybe 55 to 65, maybe over 50, but you don't need to know for the purposes of the survey my exact age. Now, age is a personal trait. So if you're taking a principle, you just extrapolate out and say, okay, then what Hidalgo is saying is when it's kind of a personal trait, if general information is okay, then you go with general, not specific information. Then stop. What we just did is we identified the issuance principle. We read the rule of law, that was the argument. We did the analysis, that was what we just finished doing. And now what we're looking for is an answer choice that reflects what our minds produced. Your mind has to produce it. So go directly to the credited answer choice during this briefing period and see how close you were to where they ended up. And here's what the writers said. The answer choice here was A. Surveys gathering information for a specific purpose, that was this, should not collect more detailed personal information, that would be age, than is necessary to achieve the purpose. So, one more time. Surveys gathering information for a specific purpose should not collect more detailed personal information than is necessary to achieve the purpose. That's the answer. Now, when that settles in, when you have that under your belt and truly understand it, look at the other choices. And then understand why they're not right. B. Survey respondents should not be asked a particular question if they are unlikely to answer accurately. I have no clue where that comes from. Again, the argument here is we need some information about employment status and age. We need to ask about age, and then Hidalgo says, well, that's fine, but we don't need the specific age, so general information will do. B just doesn't come anywhere near that. C. Sensitive personal information. Okay, well maybe age is sensitive. Let's stipulate it is. So sensitive personal information should be gathered only if a secure means of storing that information is available. Well, that's not the principle. The principle here is not about storing the information, it's what type of information do you need to gather. C is a fine inference. You could certainly infer C from that information, but you're not identifying a principle. D. Surveys should be allowed to gather any information that might be needed to meet their purposes, and that's a million miles away. Again, the principle here is when it's personal, keep it narrow, and D's nowhere near that. E. Surveys should gather detailed, personal information, so they hit that, only if survey respondents are first told about how that information will be used. Okay, you can infer that. But that's not the principle. The principle is not about being told. The principle is keep it general if you don't have to get too specific, don't get too specific on personal matters. So E is not the answer. The answer is A. Question number 2, they want an assumption. Which one of the following is an assumption required by the argument? So you should have your slash marks in there. Here's what I have here. In 1893, an excavation led by Wilhelm uncovered an ancient city that he believed to be Troy. The site of the war described in Homer's epic poem, an Iliad. I got it. That slash mark at the punctuation says stop. You got to get the law. The argument is the law. I got it. Okay, so Wilhelm uncovers an ancient city, and Wilhelm believes it is Troy. All right. Here comes the conclusion, but that belief cannot be correct. So this author is saying Wilhelm is wrong. And what's got to follow from that is this author's got to explain to us why Wilhelm is wrong, and that'll be the reasoning. So here's the why. In the Iliad, the Trojan War lasted 10 years, but a city as small as the one uncovered by Wilhelm, by his team, right, could not have withstood a siege lasting 10 years. So the writer cites evidence. The evidence is what's appeared in the Iliad. The evidence is used to confront and contradict Wilhelm's belief that he has discovered Troy. But do you get that the author is depending on, relying exclusively on, the only reasoning we were offered, right, is that if according to the Iliad, it was a 10-year war. This city could not have lasted a 10-year war. The author is relying on the information in the Iliad being correct. That must be true for this to be valid, because if it's not correct, then the author's reasoning is destroyed. Again, you do that work. The issue, assumption. The law, the argument. The analysis, we just did it. My conclusion now, what I'm looking for is an answer choice that reflects what my mind produced. And in the briefing stage, let them help us. The answer here is E. The Iliad accurately represents the duration of the Trojan War. That statement has to be true for this to be valid. If that statement is not correct, then the Iliad does not accurately represent the duration of the Trojan War, then whoever wrote this has proceeded on a false premise, and they've only given you one premise, which is they're relying completely on the Iliad. So that's going to be the answer. Now, you got to get that. Okay. Now you go back and say, well, nothing else is going to have to be true for the conclusion to be valid. And the conclusion is that Wilhelm is wrong. And not only that, but Wilhelm is wrong because of what's in the Iliad. Okay. What does A say? A says in 1893, scholars knew of no other ancient city that could have been Troy. What has that got to do with Wilhelm's conclusion, right? That Wilhelm is wrong. I'm sorry, not Wilhelm's conclusion. The author's conclusion that Wilhelm is wrong, and the explanation that you're wrong because the Iliad says it lasted 10 years. So it's not relevant what other scholars knew or didn't know. B, the Iliad does not provide any clues about the specific location of Troy. Again, that's non-responsive to this argument. The specific location of Troy is not what is an issue. What's an issue is, could it have withstood a 10-year siege? C, Wilhelm's team found no evidence in the city that they excavated that a siege had occurred there. Well, wait for the helicopter to go overhead. Off with you. I'll try to get a no-fly zone around the deck. All right, C. Wilhelm's team found no evidence in the city they excavated that a siege had occurred there is not relevant to the reasoning offered here that it couldn't be the city because the Iliad said the siege took 10 years and this city couldn't have survived the siege that was 10 years. And again, just on a separate issue, that you found no evidence is not itself evidence that there was no siege. That you found no evidence is evidence that you found no evidence of a siege. It's a great test. D. The city excavated by Wilhelm's team had many features that scholars of the time believed Troy had. Well, that's great, but this guy's saying it wasn't Troy. And we're defending the position it wasn't Troy. And D is kind of taking the other position, so certainly not an assumption that we're looking underlies our argument. So the answer there is E. Question number 3. Garcia responds to Flynn by. Okay, so we're going to read, Flynn's going to say something, Garcia's going to respond. We're being asked to describe how Garcia responded. So did Garcia use a counterexample? Did Garcia, I don't know, use an analogy? How did they challenge a premise? What did he do? Okay, so here's Flynn. Allowing people to collect large damage awards when they successfully sue corporations that produce dangerous products clearly benefits consumers, since the possibility of large awards gives corporations a strong incentive to reduce safety risk associated with their project. Man, that's one long run-on sentence. So take a deep breath. You see the punctuation there. There is a comma, and the word since follows the comma. You can always begin reading with the word since. The word since is going to introduce the reasoning. So however you want to do this. In other words, if you were read for, let's not do that. I was going to read from the word since, which you can do, but let's keep it simple. Let's one more time, because there are a lot of words there. What Flynn is saying is that allowing people to collect large damage awards when they successfully sue corporations that produce dangerous products, we don't like them. So allowing large damage awards under those circumstances clearly benefits the consumer. So clearly benefits the consumer. And you say, well, why? Because that's the conclusion, and the why comes with the since or the because. And that is because the possibility of large awards gives corporations a strong incentive to reduce safety risks associated with their products. I got it. Okay. So Garcia hears that. Garcia presumably understands it. And Garcia responds by saying, without sensible limits, damage awards can be so high that corporations are destroyed. Okay, the corporations are destroyed. As a result of the corporations being destroyed, employees lose their jobs and the productivity of the corporation is lost. Okay, so people get kicked out of work. This harms the economy and thus harms the consumer. So you lose jobs, you lose productivity. When you lose productivity, you harm the economy. When you harm the economy, you harm the consumer. So isn't it fair to say that Garcia has explored Flynn's position in the way that Flynn did not? That Flynn just sees one picture here, right? The one picture Flynn sees is if you slap them on the hand hard enough, they may stop what they're doing because of the pain. And Garcia turns around and says, well, yes, that may happen. They may, in fact, stop producing those products. But you know what else may happen? They may go out of business. If that award is so high that it puts them out of business, you lose jobs, you lose productivity, you harm the economy, you harm the consumer. So Garcia is saying, you know what? This may turn on you. That, there may be an individual who benefits from this, but consumers overall may not. So however they're going to do this, Garcia has introduced into this a conversation that Flynn didn't engage in, a premise that Flynn didn't examine. So I'm done. I got it. I don't know what words they're going to use. Let's see what we have here. So again, go directly to the credited answer choice. And here it is A, that Garcia responds by arguing that the policy supported in Flynn's argument could have undesirable consequences. Doesn't that make sense? Like, you read it and you say, hello? So the only thing we don't have are the words of the writer. And this exercise in briefing, for heaven, you're going to get the words of the writer, and if you do this long enough, you're going to get the mind of the writer, and then you're going to go to law school. Okay, so A's it. Now I got it. Let me look at the other choices. B, does Garcia respond by providing evidence that undermines one of the premises of Flynn's argument? No, and you got to slow down. Garcia's not challenging Flynn's premise, which is that it's a strong incentive for corporations not to engage in that conduct. He's not challenging that. He's introducing something else, which is the unintended consequence of that. So think about B. Understand why B is not the answer, and you're a hell of a lot closer to being an attorney. C. Does Garcia respond by comparing Flynn's argument to an obviously flawed argument that has the same logical structure? I don't have a clue where they're going with that. If you do, you can give me a call or you shoot me an email and let me know, but that's out there. D. Does Garcia respond by contending that Flynn's argument could be used to support a policy that is inconsistent with the policy that Flynn advocates? Isn't that beautiful? What in God's name did they just write? So the briefing gets you to slow down so that on the test, if that was choice A, you wouldn't choose it. Okay, so break down D. The writer is not writing as your friend. What D says here is does Garcia respond by contending that Flynn's argument, we know what Flynn's argument is, right? His argument is we want to do this, right? And that'll get them to change their behavior. Is Garcia arguing that by contending that Flynn's argument could be used to support a policy? Okay, so to support the policy is this, that is inconsistent with the policy Flynn advocates. Well, no, the policy Flynn advocates is this. So he's not, no. You might say inconsistent with the policy that Garcia advocates, but certainly not with the one that Flynn advocates. It's a very challenging exam. So D is wrong. Again, reread that, reread it until, knowing that A is the answer, having vested in A to begin with, D becomes, over time for some of you, clearer and clearer. And finally, E. Does Garcia respond by providing an alternative explanation for a situation described in Flynn's argument? Garcia is not providing an alternative explanation for Flynn's argument. He's challenging Flynn's conclusion. He's not providing an alternative explanation. He's saying, hey, Chuckles, your conclusion, right, that this is going to benefit the consumer is wrong. I'm not giving you an alternative explanation. I'm saying it's wrong. It's not going to benefit the consumer because people are going to lose jobs, productivity is going to go down, because productivity goes down, the economy is going to suffer, and because the economy suffers, consumers suffer. So he is not giving an alternative explanation. He is addressing the conclusion and challenging it by pointing out that the conclusion you drew, you being Flynn, has undesirable consequences. So again, number 3, I think number 3 is really rich. Spend some time, slow down, and when you really understand why A is the answer, you're in business. They all will not be that rich. Question number 4. Monroe and Wilkerson disagree over the truth of which one of the following. So this is the agree, disagree. They either agree about the conclusion or they agree about the reasoning. They either disagree about the reasoning or they disagree about the conclusion. Here, it's what do they disagree over. Okay, Monroe. Our organization's project has been a failure. Well, we know what the son of a bitch's conclusion is, right? So if Wilkerson's going to disagree, that'll be the answer with respect to the conclusion, right? Our organization's project has been a failure, says Monroe. Here comes the reasoning. Our stated goal was to reduce as much as possible the number of homes in the community that lack electricity. So that was our goal, as much as possible, reduce the number that don't have electricity. Now, at the project's conclusion, approximately 2,000 homes are without electricity. So clearly, according to Monroe, 2,000 homes without electricity is too many, meaning it wasn't reduced as much as possible, and therefore it was a failure. Okay. Wilkerson says, but before the project began, over 5,000 of the homes had no electricity. 5,000 had no electricity. Surely bringing electricity to another 3,000 homes counts as a success for the project. So that's what they disagree about. They disagree about whether or not the providing electricity to 3,000 homes is a success. That's it. I'm done. Answer choice here is E. Leaving approximately 2,000 homes in the community without electricity at the conclusion of the project counts as a failure for the project. That's what they disagree about. That's pretty straightforward. The other choice is A. Approximately 2,000 homes in the communities are still without electricity. They don't disagree about that. B. Before the organization's project began, over 5,000 homes in the community had no electricity. There's no disagreement about that, none that I know of. C. The organization's project must be considered a failure if any home in the community has no electricity. They don't disagree about that. It's getting it down, not eliminating it. D. The stated goal of the project was to reduce as much as possible the number of homes in the community that lacked electricity. They don't disagree with that. They agree on that. And so we're going to hold there. That's how you solve questions 1 through 4.